Welcome to Connecting the Community podcast. I am your host, Marge Andre. I will be connecting you to people, organizations, and events that create community. I am creating this podcast in Richmond Hill, an eclectic and very culturally diverse community with lots of trees and streams and interesting people, just up the hill from Toronto. On this podcast, I am very pleased that I am speaking with Tom Allen. We are going to focus our conversation on his upcoming show, J.S. Bach's Long Walk in the Snow, happening at the Richmond Hill Center for the Performing Arts on Thursday, January 18th. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, Marge. Thank you.
Oh, I'm very, very glad we found the time to have this conversation. Tom, let's start by you telling us a little about yourself. I Googled Tom Allen, and there are lots of you. So tell me about you. This Tom Allen.
You don't want to hear about the evangelical preacher in Ohio, or the horse dentist in Iowa, or the former governor of Maine?
Maine, or I think there's a football guy too. So
yes, there's a Welsh stand-up comic. They're everywhere, Tom Allens.
Yes, but you.
Okay, so I am the Tom Allen who grew up in Montreal. I became a musician. I was excited in high school, in the high school band, playing the trombone. I decided that's what I wanted to do, and I pursued that career somewhat successfully through my 20s. Played with some really great professional orchestras. I lived in Boston and New York, and had a couple of really exciting opportunities. I toured with a brass quintet across Canada for several years. And then as I approached my 30th birthday, I began to realize that the storytelling I'd been doing with the brass quintet, brass players, you typically get very tired playing continuously. You'll notice in a symphony, the violins often play for a great length of time without stopping, whereas brass players always need a break. There's a physical factor there. You just can't continue to play for half an hour. So that's why brass quintets usually have somebody that tells stories. Because they allow that break to be an organic thing. So I found that I really enjoyed that part of the work and decided to focus on that, and was rewarded quite quickly with a job at the CBC, and that was 33 years ago, and I'm still there.
Okay, very good. That wasn't a bridge version. I'm sure you could have gone longer, but thank you for that. That's a good, very good synopsis.
And I suppose the other thing I should say is that as well as work at the CBC, I've nurtured over the last 25 years of authoring. I've published 3 books, and I've written dozens and dozens of shows like this one. So writing and storytelling is really what I do now.
Yeah. I did look at your website, and I will put that in the podcast notes, but you are an interesting person who's done some really interesting things. So
thank you.
Okay, now let's go on and tell us about this show that's coming up. Like, I looked at it, and what is it? So I think it really requires an explanation.
Okay, well, it's part of a series of shows that I've developed with my partner, my wife, Lori Gemmel, who is a harpist, and these shows all mix history and storytelling and music. So this is a story that I tell, and it is based in history and fact, and that story is illustrated with music. So sometimes the music being played is simply a continuation of the mood of the story I'm telling. Other times it's an illustration. So Suba Shankaran is going to be singing with us in Richmond Hill. And in the case of this particular show, J.S. Bach's Long Walk in the Snow, there is a female character in the story who is from history, and Suba essentially becomes that person. So it sort of steps into musical theater in a way. It's storytelling, musical theater, history, and we call them chamber musicals. And we found it's a very effective way of conveying both music and story. So there are 5 of us that do this show. In the case of Richmond Hill, it's Suba, who I mentioned, wonderful singer. Laurie plays the harp. Joe Phillips plays the bass and the guitar. And our violinist is Erica Braun, who is an internationally recognized Canadian violin soloist. So the music ranges greatly from music from Bach's time, as far as we know, Bach would have heard it, to much more contemporary things that reflect the nature of the story.
You,
I play trombone. That was the thing
you
that
do play trombone. Okay.
I do. I mean, you
Okay.
know, as I'm sitting there on stage, it's kind of dumb if I don't, but it's really an extra thing that I do in addition to mostly telling the story.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this story? Like, you don't have to give it away, but
Oh, sure.
like, why? The question is like, why? Why
Well,
tell
so
the story?
this is a curious little wrinkle in music history, and there are many of these. The thing about music history, especially when we're talking about 1705, which is the year when this happened, it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And if you try to remember the specifics of what happened a few months ago from a day in your life, 4 months ago, you know, you'll probably come up with a few things. Maybe remember having a lunch with somebody, maybe you went for a walk, but then the rest of it, you'll fill in with speculation on what you probably did, because we don't hang on to those kinds of details. Now, the thing about this moment in J.S. Bach's life is it happened when he was just 20 years old. He was not yet famous. So there's no reliable account from the time of almost any of the details. But in retrospect, when people looked back, the earliest history of this point of his life is about 35 or 40 years after the fact. People look back and said, oh, that was an important thing. This must have been what happened. So all we really know is that J.S. Bach, in his first job, he was 20 years old, was hired as an organist in the town of Arnstadt. He took the job, he accepted the job as organist and looking at the instrument to make sure it was okay. Didn't know until after he'd agreed that he was also expected to lead a group of university-aged students in what they called cantatas, kind of church pageants. He was supposed to make these productions with these students. He had no experience doing that. And further, he had no experience with bad musicians. And that's what these university-age students were. They were lazy, they didn't care, they had none of the musical heritage that Bach did, which was growing up in a giant musical family. At the time, the name Bach was synonymous with musician. So people in that area of Germany would say, we have a new Bach, meaning we have a new musician. So he came from a rich, multi-generational family that was all music focused. So he really didn't know how to work with people that weren't from that background. And he was terrible. He was not a good manager. He was insulting. He was abusive. They hated him. There was another church down the street that had a nice old organist who was much nicer, so all the kids went there. And furthermore, most of these were older than him. They were probably 21, 22, 23, and he was just 18. They didn't respect him. And it was rapidly becoming a very, very bad situation. It came to a head in August of 1705 when Bach was walking through town in the evening and was ambushed by a group of 6 of his students who were so mad at him that one of them attacked him and hit him on the head with a big stick. And we know this because of court records. We know that is accurate. But Bach had been an orphan since age 9. Both of his parents died when he was 9 years old, within 9 months of each other. So he had to take care of himself, and he could. He was carrying a knife, and he pulled a knife, and he might have killed this guy. He might easily have murdered him, which, well, would not have been a good situation because everybody hated him. There was no doubt that he would be guilty, and there you go. That would be the end of everything that he did following this. Luckily, the friends held them apart, cooler heads prevailed. But when it came to addressing this issue, and Bach went to the town council and complained, he said, you have to get rid of this guy. He attacked me. I'm not safe in this town. And they said to him, you're the leader. Look, we're paying you to lead this group. Don't come crying to us. Figure it out. And it was a real moment of reckoning for this young man who had to face that for the first time in his life, he was in over his head. He didn't know what to do. So he asked for leave. And he walked. He walked 400 kilometers north, 17 days and nights, all the way to Lubeck, the port city on the North Sea, where he stayed for 4 months and learned from a mentor figure there who was an organist and composer who was 68 years old and who had learned all of these lessons of management and administration and inspiration and dealing with volunteers. So Bach stayed there for 4 months. Now, we don't know anything about specifically what happened to Bach in that time. All we know is that he left, he was gone, and he came back. But when he came back, he started writing these cantatas, which to this day are now revered. The very first thing he wrote after 4 months away is still regularly performed by early music ensembles around the world. So it really was a formative coming of age moment. These 4 months away changed him enough that he was able to become the composer that we revere 300 years later. So the show is about what happened. What happened in those 4 months? And we have a few clues, but a lot of it is connecting the dots. And as I tell the story, I try to include the audience in that process of speculation because, as I say, there are very, very few verifiable facts. All we can say is these are the forces that were in play. This is what Lubeck was like. This is what these people around him were like. Somehow he became someone truly significant in the course of this time.
I'm looking forward to hearing you have it performed, you performing it. Now, what prompted you to do this story? Did someone say, hey, this is a good idea? Or did you go for a long walk and come up with the idea?
Well, that's an interesting question. I came across this wrinkle. I mean, it's written about in very spare terms. In his obituary, his son, his middle son, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, we think that he wrote the obituary for J.S. Bach when he died in 1750, and he said he included the fact that he traveled on foot. So the fact that somebody walked 400 kilometers may not have been that unusual at the time, but it was something important enough that his son noted it in his obituary. So it shows a kind of character. And that was really intriguing to me when I first saw this. But the other part is that we all know what that's like. We all know how if you're facing an emotional crisis, you're facing a situation where you're really beyond your capacity. And with COVID and strife in the world today, I think that we all know how that feels.
Yeah.
One of the first reactions is to go for a walk. It's what we do. We want to get out. We want to walk. We want to somehow clear our heads, move our bodies, get a different perspective. Even just the sound of your footsteps in the snow is soothing and enough of a consolation, enough of a thought process to begin to sort out your situation. So that to me was super interesting. The idea that this long ago, over 300 years ago, this person who in many ways, we tend to turn these great artists of the past, whether it's Shakespeare or Van Gogh or whoever, we tend to turn them into superheroes. They weren't. They were people. They were people who had the same ordinary challenges that all of us have, plus some extraordinary abilities that helped them somehow get by. But it doesn't mean their lives were sweet and beautiful and without struggle. And he still had to go for a walk to try to figure out what to do. So the idea that in that thing that we've all done, that we all know, there can be a clue as to what it's like to be that person in that time, in that situation. That's really intriguing to me. It's something we can share with him. We can go for a walk and see how that feels.
Okay, that is intriguing. And just when did you start with this idea?
It's been around for a long time, and for me, I guess the the moment that it started to crystallize was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I was speaking with Jess Milton, who is a former CBC colleague. She produced Stuart McLean's Vinyl Cafe for the last 10 years of that wonderful show. Yeah. And she asked me, inspired no doubt by the fact that Stuart's career was launched into a higher level by the Dave Cook's A Turkey Story. She said to me, "Have you got a Christmas story?" And I was like, "No, I don't." And I thought, wait a minute. When Bach walked to Lubeck, he left in October, he came back in February. So he spent Christmas. He spent that beautiful winter season in this place that is famed for its romantic Christmas scenes. Like this idea of the Christmas market that we have, this heritage of this Germanic heritage, that's totally Lubeck culture. It was a city of markets. It was a city of these beautiful steep-roofed brick warehouses. It was a city that had a very long, deep merchant heritage because it's a port. And there was a salt mine a little further south in Lüneburg. So people would bring herring to Lubeck. They would salt it with salt from Lüneburg, and then it was sold and moved off. So it was very prosperous and very busy. The idea of going for him, somebody from a small town that had none of that, walking for 17 days and arriving in darkness of late November in this glittering port with lights and wealth and characters. And furthermore, we tend to think of industrial places now as not necessarily the cultural hubs, but they always were. A place like Lubeck had princes and dignitaries and soldiers and merchants, and they all mixed in together. And they all went to church. The organist was named Dietrich Buxtehude. And so just by going there, he would have been exposed to all of this beauty, all of this Christmas romance, all of this this kind of wide-eyed, opening, glittering brilliance, and it would have informed everything about him. So once again, if you've had the experience of arriving at a new place, especially at Christmas time or in the dark of winter, and you see those glittering lights and you think, wow, what is this place? Well, that's what he did.
Okay. Have you been to Lubeck?
I have not been to Lubeck, and
Okay.
I know people who have. And the first thing that most of them say is, are you going to talk about marzipan? You have to talk about marzipan. It's very important. I'm like, well, no, marzipan isn't part of the story. So that's one of the challenges I have is that Lubeckers are very proud of marzipan and the fact that they claim they invented marzipan. I kind of doubt it. I think it probably was invented at a place where almonds actually grow, but they use it in this delicious Christmas bread called Stollen.
Who is your target market for this show? Like who's really going to like it?
Well, I think it's anybody that enjoys a good story, honestly. It's not something that you need to have a whole lot of experience with classical music to enjoy.
Okay.
And one of the things that I found is that people listen to music very differently when it's within a story. If you think about your reaction to a movie score, for example, the music that we hear in movies, we're not necessarily aware of how differently we experience it because it's part of a story, but it's night and day. So in this case, this is a story that connects together a whole bunch of different music. So I think really it's anybody that enjoys a good story. I'm very, my whole career really, sounds like a grand kind of statement, but it's true. My whole career has been about demystifying classical music. Classical music has a whole lot of culture around it that can be really distancing to many people. And, there's a lot of sense that you're supposed to know something. You're supposed to dress up. You're supposed to know when to clap and when not to clap. And none of that has anything to do with what any of the people who created that music wanted. People like Bach or Mozart or Beethoven were in no way invested in any sort of elitist sense of propriety and decorum. In fact, it's so much the opposite. It's kind of shocking for us if we learn about the circumstances in which those people, those great composers, first performed their music. It's opposite from what we now think. So in the case of Bach and these concerts, they were in this giant cathedral, St. Mary's in Lubeck, which seats 3,000 people. It is huge. The inside, literally, is as big as a football field. And there are 24 different chapels within the church, different separate chapel spaces. And so in 1705, an era before any kind of artificial lighting, and remember, Lubeck's a lot further north than Richmond Hill. So it got dark very early. It got dark probably 3 p.m. around Christmas time. Sun didn't get up till sometime after 8. So these people are in candlelight in the dark. And, there's quite a bit of detail around what life was like in that place at that time. And we know that they had to hire extra police constables around these concerts because people were getting up to business in the back rows of the church in the dark. So they had to have kind of a morality squad, which is not, I don't think, what most people associate the music of Johann Sebastian Bach.
No.
With people getting it on in the back of the church in the dark, at Christmas time. But that's what was happening. They had kids running around everywhere. The place was packed and crowded and noisy and thrilling. Nothing at all like the austerity that we tend to associate with that music. So, yeah, that's a way of saying that this story and this music is for anyone that enjoys a good story and good music.
Okay, thank you. And I like the idea of demystifying classical music. I think that's a very admirable goal to set for yourself.
Thank you. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So, but how do you really talk about the value of or the power of music? I ask many of the people who are musicians involved with music this question, and I'm liking the answer I get. So how would you answer that?
The power of music. Well, so I have a whole alternate talk and program that I've been working on over the years around the idea of music being a proto-language. There's quite a bit of research that says that in our evolutionary past, when we were tree-dwelling primates,
hundreds of thousands of years and maybe even generations ago, we used musical gestures to convey really fundamental information. So it's really hard with music to say specific things like, have you got change for a 10? You're trying to say that with music, or that's a Robertson screwdriver. You need a Phillips, that those kinds of messages, really specific things. No, you can't do that with music. But with music, you can say, I love you. You can say, look out, there's a rock falling, or there's a charging animal, or you can say, I will do anything I can to protect you. You're the most important thing to me. You can say those emotional messages with music way faster and way more effectively than you can with words. So music is this vehicle to reach our deepest perceptions and our most primitive perceptions in a really profound way. And when those musical messages can be conveyed along with verbal stories or with words that have an intellect that addresses our more frontal lobe as opposed to our animal brains, when those two sides of our perception can be equally accessed, it has an effect unlike anything else in life, I think. Like, we all have those moments where we get goosebumps, where music does something to us physically. And it's very hard to explain, but I think it is that it's reaching us on our deepest, most primitive level and communicating with us on the same level that we remember from being an infant and hearing the sound of our caregiver's voice, a feeling of comfort and safety. That's what music does at its best. So I think that's why it holds such an important place for us. And on one hand, as we're going through economic uncertainty right now, in a time of political polarity and great struggles, there's a part of society that says music becomes less important. We don't have time. We can't spend time on music. Things are too dire. But on the other hand, music is the one thing that can reach us in those times. That a beautiful piece of music, a beautiful melody, a song can make us connect with a really deeply needing part of ourselves. Even in the most dire circumstance, music is something that can bring us a sense of community and a sense of love and a sense of belonging. So I think as times become more and more uncertain, music becomes actually more valuable.
Woo, powerful and fascinating what you just said there. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I'm going to sort of change the tone of the questions I'm asking. This is one of the first things I thought of when I saw the title, A Long Walk in the Snow, was I thought of Pierre Trudeau's Long Walk in the Snow that happened about 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Is there any connection at all?
Well, there is to me. I mean, I remember that too. I mean, I'm 62, so I think you have to be above a certain age to remember that. But sure, that the idea of going for a walk in the snow. But I don't know whether I first learned that expression with Trudeau as he was contemplating whether he was going to stay in office, and in many ways that time, no matter how you feel about him, that time it was somewhat similar to what I'm talking about with J.S. Bach's life, even though Bach was 20 and Trudeau was whatever he was, 65 or something. It's a time of reassessment. It's a time of crisis, and the idea that you solve these unsolvable problems by going for a walk in the snow. For Jimmy Carter, in his very troubled time as president, he's a good man trying to do the right thing. He walked in the Rose Garden. So I guess there wasn't snow to walk in DC at the time, but it's what we do when we're trying to weigh our options. So that expression, going for a walk in the snow, has always meant for me, confronting something challenging. And I don't know whether it existed as an expression before Trudeau. I suspect it did, but that was that's where I first learned that expression.
Okay. Thank you for answering that question for me. As I said, I did look at your website and I see there's another Richmond Hill connection. You released a film last spring, The Last Curlew, and it stars Richmond Hiller, R.H. Thompson. Can you tell us a little bit about this film? And do you know R.H. Thompson well?
I do. I know him quite well. we met through a group that used to meet together to play pool and tell stories, and then they played hockey together for a while. And this was a pandemic project, this film, and it was a story. It was a show similar to. It started as a show similar to the one that I've described to you, with storytelling and music and dance. But when it came to making a film version of it, because there was a pandemic and we couldn't perform live, I realized pretty quickly that this was not a job for me, but for a real actor. And I called RH and he said yes, much to my amazement. I didn't notice until your email that his own initials are also that of Richmond Hill. That was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
That was a new perception. But yeah, we know each other quite well. He's just released a book by the Ghostlight, which is a beautiful thing. I got a copy for Christmas, so I'm excited about reading that. And we share an interest in music and storytelling and their film. The Last Curlew, you can stream it at my website, tomallen.com, and he does a fantastic job. He's a beautiful, beautiful actor, which I think anybody who's seen his work would know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for filling in that gap there. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I'm really excited to be bringing the show to the Richmond Hill Center for Performing Arts. I had been to the Plaza Suite a few years ago to see my friend Stephen Fearing, who's a folk singer. He played a show there, and I thought, wow, this is a beautiful space. And when I was recently in Richmond Hill, I was reminded that it has retained its character as a town. The danger with being this as close as it is to the swallowing monster of the GTA is that it could lose its identity, lose its character. But I felt like it really has not. Like that strip, that main strip, and the businesses are all clearly, to me, local family businesses, so that it feels like it's hung on to its identity, which I think is something pretty significant and pretty rare in this urban environment. So the idea that we could bring a show to this beautiful facility that is in what still feels like a really intimate town, I think that's kind of exciting. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Okay, very good. And I will put in the podcast notes how to get tickets. We're on your website to go look at that. It is on starts at 7:30 p.m. And did want to say that if anyone's listening from Guelph, I've got a few friends in Guelph I'm going to send this podcast to.
Great.
You are doing the show in
Guelph, and then Collingwood the day after that.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that weekend in January has 3 shows, all with the same crew, with Subha Shankaran and Erica Ram, Joe Phillips, and Laurie Gemmell and me.
Very good. Very good. Okay. I do end the podcast with a guest response to this one question. Name one thing that you really like about this community. And you sort of alluded to it, but and I recognize you really haven't been to Richmond Hill that often, but what's something that you really like about Richmond Hill?
Yeah, I feel like it still knows what it is. I mean, it sounds kind of silly and obvious, but I can tell you a whole bunch of places I've been that don't know what they are anymore. With the forces of growth and globalism and urban sprawl and whatever else. I mean, Richmond Hill has had an amazing growth and prosperity over the last 30 years. Yeah. And you can see that as you approach, from either side, from the 400 or the 404, either way you come in, you see this growth of this community. But when you get to the middle, it's a place that is a place. There's still, you think of, it wasn't Dorothy Parker. Who was it? I'm forgetting her name. The writer from Oakland, California, who, when somebody asked her, "Were you going to go back to Oakland?" She said, "Why? Why would I go there? There's no there there." One of the great repeatable quotes. Well, it feels to me there's a there in Richmond Hill. It still has the focus of a place that knows what it is, and that's pretty impressive and unusual.
Okay. Thank you for that perspective. It's when you live here, it's more difficult to have that sort of perspective. So thank you for that. But thank you again for taking the time to do this podcast. Looking forward to your show. I'm looking forward to having lots of my friends there at the show. So it's enjoy the rest of the holiday season, and we'll be in touch.
Marsh, thank you. You're doing an amazing job of connecting the community. I'm really glad that I stumbled onto your podcast, and I thank you for including me. I'm very grateful.
Thank you for listening. I would very much appreciate you sharing this podcast. Please tune in next week as we continue to explore the community. Consider emailing me at Marge, M-A-R-J, at margeandre.com. I welcome suggestions for podcast guests. Stay well, stay connected.